And yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So welcome. It's really good to be here with you today. And yeah, we'll talk about feedback loop, and yeah, its effectiveness in the context of young learners, actually, in second language writing, in the context of, second language writing. So let's start. Yeah, first I would like to talk about who am I really briefly. I'm an English language teacher. I have a BA degree in ELT, English language teaching, and I hold a master's degree as well in applied linguistics and communication. And currently I'm a PhD student in ELT department as well. And my teaching context is young learners. I teach in a private school in Turkey, and my students are 8 years old, actually. They are in second grade. And yeah, what I teach is actually I teach English as a foreign language, and yeah, we follow communicative language teaching approach. And of course, we cover all skills. So in my sessions, I include reading, writing, listening, speaking, all these 4 skills with my learners. So I would be really happy if you can share your teaching context as well with me in the chat box, so that I can see your teaching context too, and your profile of students, and yeah, where you teach, how you which levels you teach as well. I would really appreciate if you can share with us. And yeah, I will be following the chat box. Yeah, as I mentioned, my students are monolingual. Actually, they are Turkish students. Their first language is Turkish. And yeah, they are learning English as a foreign language. So yeah, we we see that, yeah, I teach in primary school in Italy, really nice. So again, young learner context, really nice. Another, yeah, from Turkey, and really nice, yeah. And maybe if you're teaching young learners as well, what are the ages actually? Primary students, really nice. So I hope this session will be fruitful for you then. Really nice. So let's get started. I will be following as well the comments. So when we see feedback, so when we say, I think all of us, we are kind of familiar with this term, feedback, we hear it, especially with the, assessment for learning oriented assessment procedures. Lastly, in recent years, the trend has become really popular as well in the field, that I think we start hearing this term much more than how we used to hear it. So I would like to actually hear from you, what's your conception of feedback? When we say feedback, what does it remind you? What kind of what are your thoughts, actually, beliefs about feedback? What you think about it? Yeah, I see that again, we have, yeah, young learners, really nice. And yeah, when we talk about feedback, okay, I see that improving ourselves for the better, definitely, yeah, I agree, exactly. Bridging a gap between current ability and desired outcome, really nice, exactly, because I think so, feedback functions as a bridge, actually, right? To improve, to develop ourselves and, yeah, our learners' performance, actually. And yeah, in a bit, I will share my idea as well about feedback. But yeah, definitely, it's for the improvement, the main aim, we can say. Okay, let's see. So it is the information communicated to learners based on their performance or production to change their thinking or behavior to improve learning, exactly like how we mentioned. So it is, there's kind of an information that we provide to our students when we think about the teacher's feedback. And it is based on, it's about their performance or production. Either it's on speaking or writing or reading, listening, whatever the skill is. It is the information that we give them. And it is kind of to change if there's a need to change, actually. If the change is needed, then it is the information to change their thinking or their behavior for their improvement, for their development, as you mentioned as well. And yeah, when we give feedback actually to our students, giving feedback on their performance provides valuable information that it is believed to facilitate learning. When we think about this information, the idea behind is that, yeah, we would facilitate this learning process as well. And it is based on actually Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. And here in this theory, we see that, yeah, language development occurs when our students have both sufficient and efficient help, scaffolding from either outside or from themselves as well, so that they can be supported by agents such as teachers, in this case us, and then become self-regulated learners who can use the L2 freely in their zone of proximal development, in their ZPT. Actually, this is the main aim, that, yeah, they can become autonomous, self-regulated learners, that they can use their second language freely in their zone of development. But how it's possible? Exactly, with this scaffolding. And how is this scaffolding? It should be sufficient and efficient, and yeah, it can be supported by agents. So who are we? Like teachers or peers, like we mentioned. So it is kind of a help scaffold that we provide, and yeah, in the end result, the aim is to make them become exactly like autonomous, self-regulated learners, that they can use their second language. So this is the main understanding and idea actually behind feedback as well. And feedback in writing. So yeah, this session is mainly about the writing skill in EFL context. And I would like to see actually if you are practicing writing skills in your teaching. So again, you can comment in the chat box if you can tell me, like, if you integrate writing skills as well in your sessions, in your teaching, that would be amazing too. And I see some comments again about feedback. Yeah, it's information given to the learner about the learner's performance. Really nice. And yeah, I see that, yeah, you teach writing as well. Yeah, and exactly. In Malta, as English teacher, we assign students a writing task on a weekly basis. That's really nice, actually. Yeah. I will talk about that as well, like weekly assignments, like process of writing, and practice grammar by writing a passage. Really nice. Not with this age group. They practice mainly input, listening, and comprehension. Yeah, true. If exactly like the young learners, depends on their age, of course. If they don't know how to write specifically, I mean, it's not really possible to practice this skill. Yeah, we too give feedback. On accuracy, content, form, exactly. Really nice. Yeah, I see that most of you practice writing too. So in my teaching too, actually, like, it's not my main focus. I'm not a writing teacher, but of course we integrate writing in our sessions. Like I do it like that as well. And yeah, feedback in writing, like how we talked about feedback already. So it is the information provided to identify actually learners' strengths and weaknesses in specifically writing, but it doesn't have to be actually only solely writing. But here in our context, it is about writing only, their strengths and weaknesses. So we give information about them. And how we can actually give this information, how can we like provide this information? So we can either have teacher feedback or peer feedback or self-feedback or technology-based feedback. So here, teacher feedback, we are mostly familiar with this term, I think, that, yeah, especially in traditional classroom settings, that, yeah, we see that the teacher is the active agent who is carrying out the teaching activity, actually, is that, yeah, the feedback is given by the teacher, and, yeah, teacher either shows or corrects the mistakes of learners, we can see that, or peer feedback, like we can assign students together into like pairs or groups, and we can ask them exchange their ideas, they can give feedback to each other, what they think about their own work. Each other's works, or also self-feedback. So here the learners actually, they give feedback to themselves actually here, but here is like, it's more like a self-evaluation, like monitoring their production. We can see that it is possible too. And also technology-based feedback, especially I think like all of us, we hear a lot these days that like integration of AIs in EFL classrooms, we hear about them more, that, yeah, for example, we put our written work in a system, and we see that the technology-based feedback tools like platforms, they provide us feedback, they show us our mistakes, like how to correct them, even they start giving feedback on content as well, not only on grammatical accuracy level actually. So how these agents actually can give feedback, it can be either written corrective feedback or written commentary, or oral feedback. In written corrective feedback, we see that, yeah, the agents correct the mistakes in a written format. And in written commentary, for example, they write comments at the end of the paper, for example, or in the middle, wherever they see that there's a need. So in this case here, they don't correct the mistakes specifically, but they write comments, like more general, actually. Or oral feedback, they can be like one-on-one sessions. So they are not written, but they are given orally, as we can see. But also there are different ways as well of giving feedback, but these three are actually the mostly practiced feedback given, like practices in the field, that I wanted to mention them here. And when we see studies on feedback in L2 writing, so we see that mostly writing accuracy was examined. So how much accurate the learners' writings actually. And generally, the studies showed us that the experimental groups who received feedback on their on their writing work actually, they outperformed control group that they didn't receive any feedback. We can see the sample studies in the literature. And also there are some studies that showed kind of contradictory results, or like inconclusive results, that the experimental groups, they didn't outperform the control group. But how they didn't see this effect is that actually they couldn't see it in the delayed post-test. So actually what happened was, yeah, they gave the feedback to the experimental group, and they didn't provide any feedback to control group, and they gave them a post-test after this treatment period. And they saw that, yeah, the experimental group outperformed the control group. Actually, they were better than the other group. But when they gave another test again, like after some couple of weeks in a delayed post-test format, they didn't see any change, actually, a significant difference between these groups. So these authors, these researchers in the field, they started to question, like, so can we say that actually there's an impact of feedback? Like, if we cannot see it in the long run, can we really claim that actually there's a there's an impact effect of this feedback? So that's why they were kind of digging into this topic more from a different, like from the other side, looking at it from a different side of the coin, actually. And that's why they said delayed post-test should also show the difference between these groups. And actually how it's mentioned in another study in the field is that it is called feedback transfer effect. So what we see is that actually if the students can receive a feedback, and after receiving it, internalizing it, and can they transfer that feedback into a different work? So that's what they meant actually by saying, like, we should see this in a delayed test, in a delayed post-test as well. So here we see that the mostly focus in the literature is on revision accuracy rather than new written work. Like how I said, they haven't investigated efficiently or sufficiently this impact of feedback on a new written work, which is the feedback transfer. Actually, they all the time looked at how much students were able to revise their written work according to the feedback they received. So yeah, the studies on the new written work, actually, what they do with this feedback on when they need to write a new piece of paper, something different, something new, is not much actually investigated. And also when we see the context of participants, generally, like they conducted the studies with adult learners. And even in this study that was conducted in 2015, they mentioned that, yeah, 86% of the studies in the literature, they were conducted with adult learners. So these findings actually show us that there's a gap in the literature, both in the young learners context and the feedback impact on new written work of young learners. So moving from this gap in the literature, actually the starting point of this study is this, to provide information and like to fill this gap in the literature, actually, that this study asks one research question, and it's the aim is to find out the answer. Does providing feedback loop have an impact on second grade EFL students' writing performance? So here we are not only talking about feedback itself, but also feedback with feed forward, which means together feedback and feed forward, that feedback loop. So we will see in more details these concepts as well. And the design of the study is quasi-experimental because we are not, we didn't randomly assign the students into groups. And participants of the students were 40 EFL learners. And yeah, we divided them like a comparison group and experimental group. And in each group, we had 20 students. So they were divided equally. And all of them were 8 years old. And their English level actually on CFR scale was A2. So they had a basic command of English, like they were basically, like they were able to speak at a basic level in English and write some sentences, not long paragraphs, but really simple, basic way of communication skills as well. And all of them were monolingual, Turkish speakers. Nobody reported to be bilingual, or yeah, they all learned English in a school context explicitly. And the instruments of the data, actually, like how we obtain data on their writing performance, actually, we used schools exams. The school had 2 exams, one like after the term started, 2 months later. The first exam, that exam served as a pre-test. And at the end of the term, academic term, we had another test, and we used that test writing part as a post-test. And the reliability scores of those tests were already, were also measured, and they showed reliable scores of Cronbach alpha, that yeah, we were good to use them actually. And we see the instruments here that, yeah, this one was the first writing task in the pre-test. So they were supposed to describe the monster here in the picture. They were supposed to write 10 sentences about the monster. And yeah, they could use the words given in the box. And here, even we provided an example there. For example, he is green. So they were supposed to write really short sentences, like he has got eyes, he has got ears or 2 ears. So they were really free. And we see that, yeah, the maximum point that they could have received was 10 points actually. So each sentence they wrote was like, it was worth 1 point. So if there was a grammatical mistake, they didn't get that point. But if the sentence was grammatically correct, then they received their point. So the task was out of 10 points. And this was in the post-test. So we see that actually post-test was a bit more difficult than the pre-test, because we also taught about the learning effect, the time effect as well. Because as the term proceeded, the aim was actually like we assumed that their English would become better as well. So that's why the exam was different. And here they were supposed to write what they wanted or what they didn't want from Santa. Like again, they were supposed to write 10 sentences. And again, each sentence was worth 1 point. And the maximum point that they could receive was 10 points. So these were the writing tasks we used as well. And the procedure. So this study followed, again, like we said, quasi-experimental design. So the experimental group and control group, actually, they started at the same level, same time. Everything was the same. They were equal to each other. And after they started the procedure, they started to see writing activities. They started to practice some writing activities, and they used exactly the same syllabus, exactly the same activities. Nothing was different. The only different thing was that the experimental group received feedback loop, which means, like we mentioned, the teacher gave them actually what was wrong with their work and how they can change it in their upcoming activities, like how they can improve it, what they can change, what they can do differently this time. And this feedback and feed forward engaged them in a feedback loop that it was different from what we did in the control group, because control group, they had the same activities, but they received feedback only once. And it was about the grade, actually. Like the teacher was only ticking their sentences, and that's it. She didn't give any explanations. She didn't show them specifically, you should change this or you can change that. You might think about this. So this kind of feedback was not provided to control group. And this procedure, this treatment, actually lasted for 5 weeks. So we had 5 weeks between pre-test and post-test to examine if there was an impact of this feedback loop that we provided to experimental group. And then the scoring. So we scored the exams based on their grammatical errors. So our aim was mainly on accuracy. We didn't care much about the content. And also we just asked them to write actually like small sentences. So there wasn't much more to evaluate. So that's why we specifically put focus on errors in the syntax and morphology of a sentence, as well as it was also suggested in the literature too. And to ensure iterator reliability, we used 2 EFL teachers, and both of them were native speakers of English. So they also marked the papers separately as well. And that's how we ensured the iterator reliability. And to analyze the data, we compared their pre and post-test results, the experimental and comparison groups. So we used the related statistical analysis test as well, which is Kruskal-Wallis and Wilcoxon signed rank tests. And the results. So when we came to results, first we see the descriptive statistics. So here we can see that actually experimental group in the pretest, the minimum score they received was 3 and maximum was 10. And in the post-test, the minimum score was 6 and the maximum score was 10. So here we see that the experimental group's mean score in the pretest was 7.1 and in the post-test, the mean score was 8.6. And when we see the comparison group, the pretest, the minimum score they got was 2 and the maximum was 10. And in the post-test, the minimum score was 1 and the maximum score was 9 actually. And the mean scores were different here, as we see in the pretest, it was 6.6, but in the post-test it was 4.9. So when we see the pretest results of experimental and comparison group, we see that it was 7.1 and 6.6. So they were kind of similar. And in the post-test, we see that, the mean score of experimental group was 8.6 and comparison 4.9. So here we see that actually in the post-test, they were kind of, different from each other, almost double actually. But now we will see if these numbers were statistically significant, like statistically different from each other actually. We will see, we see that, as a mean score, they are different from each other, but if it's statistically significant. So we ran Kruskal-Wallis test as well. And in the pretest, we saw that the groups, actually the results were not statistically significant from each other. So what it meant was, in the pretest, experimental and comparison group, they were not different from each other. They were statistically actually not different. They were kind of at the same level. But when we look at the post-test with the 0 point number, we saw that we were able to see that there was a statistically significant difference between experimental and comparison group in the post-test. So we saw that actually their performance in writing task, in the writing exam, they were different from each other. And here we can see also the estimated marginal means as well. So here we see the blue one as the experimental group. So we see, they started here almost at the level of 7. And then we see an increase here at the post-test. So we see that, they started here at the pretest and the time. And also the control group, which is the red line. We see that they were kind of at a similar point, but they went even down. So they didn't even remain same. So we saw that actually there was a drastic decrease in their scores as well. So here we will analyze, we will talk about these results as well, like while the experimental group were going up high, like the control group were decreasing as well. So we can see that these differences in the post-test, they were statistically significant, like statistically different from each other. So here we can conclude that actually in our findings, this 5 weeks feedback loop that we engaged, that we put our students in, it kind of an impact. It had an impact actually, that because experimental group outperformed the comparison group actually, when we kept everything the same, the activities, the syllabus, the teaching, everything was the same. The only thing that we did differently was providing feedback loop. And we saw that, experimental group received higher scores than the control group. So we saw also that this post-test was more challenging probably for the learners, that the comparison group needed a scaffolding, needed a help probably from outside. And without this scaffolding, without this help, it wasn't possible for them to even remain same actually. So we saw that because probably of this lack of scaffolding that we didn't provide them, they even decreased their scores in the post-test actually. And about feedback, the results generally concluded that the feedback had an impact actually on young learners. So it is possible that young learners can get benefits from feedback and feed forward. And also this feedback impact can be seen on new written work as well, not just necessarily on revision level, but also in a new work. When they write something different, it is possible to see the impact as well, which was actually the main aim of this study. That's what we wanted to see actually. And of course, there are some implications that we can draw. So providing a feedback loop, both feedback and feed forward together, can have a positive impact for young learners in terms of their writing skills, writing abilities. So when we think about feedback, it's about what it was. Like when we give feedback, we focus on past actually, like what they did on their work. So when we are providing this feedback about what it was, we should be clear. There are some factors that we should actually keep in mind, that we can be clear and we can be specific, like specifically directly to the point. And also we should think about their emotions, especially in the young learners context. I'm sure that most of you are familiar that they are really vulnerable with their emotions, that we should give kind of like constructive feedback actually, instead of destructive criticism. So we should be really careful here, especially with young learners, not only young learners, but specifically with them as well, that we can try to be more sensitive and less being more constructive, and like while talking about even their weaknesses and negative things, still we mentioning about their positive strengths as well. And these are some factors that we should actually keep in mind while giving feedback. And when we give feed forward, it's about what can be done. So when we give feed forward, we focus on the future actually. And so that's why we focus on different factors. So here we can clearly put out our expectations, what we expect from them for the future, like in their new tasks. And also we can even set goals together with them. We can help them set their own goals as well for the, again, future tasks. And of course, providing guidance. This is a part of feedback anyway, so that, like being in the process with them, providing guidance so that they can achieve even better in their future work. And also talking about different, like what can be done differently this time, what can be different actually. So while giving feedback, it's not really possible to talk about these things, but in feed forward specifically, we can focus on these factors, these elements that will lead them also be critical as well. And eventually they can provide this critical look, they can have this critical perspective on their work, that they can become autonomous in the future, and they can become self-regulated learners, that they can even give and think about these things by themselves without needing outside help actually. This is the main aim here, what we meant by both providing feedback and feed forward, to engage them in a feedback loop. So what we saw in this study was that this was useful actually, and this had a positive impact. And of course, there are some limitations that we should mention too in this study. First of all, the number of participants, it was limited. We had only 40 participants in the study. And also we didn't provide randomization. The students were from intact classrooms. We didn't assign them randomly. For example, we took 2A as a comparison group and 2B as an experimental group. So that's why the generalizability of the findings got, of course, affected by this. And also, the treatment was only for 5 weeks. So it can be a bit short when we think about the whole academic year. I think it would be fruitful for us to know actually what would happen if this feedback loop was provided for a longer time, like maybe over a year or over an academic term, like whole term. It would give us different perspectives too, maybe. And also we could have implemented a delayed post test as well. So here in the study, we couldn't implement delayed post test, but we tried to compensate for it by giving a different task here in the second post test to see the feedback transfer effect. But also the future studies can also include a delayed post test as well, that they can see if this impact was actually stable and still it remained. And also we didn't talk about the effects of other types of feedback. We just focused on this feedback loop by the teacher, given by the teacher, and we didn't provide any information we didn't gain any information about what would happen actually if we engaged students with each other as well, like if we included them in this feedback loop by giving feedback to each other as well. So actually, these were the limitations, and also call for future studies too. I hope, they can also provide some useful information and like maybe inspirational ideas for new studies in the literature, because especially in the context of young learners, unfortunately, like there's a lack of studies that we see. Generally, the studies are conducted in university levels, in their context with the participants of like being adult learners, and especially EFL context, that it was actually interesting to see even at the second grade level with 8-year-old students, we were able to see the impact of this feedback loop on their writing accuracy. So that's why it was kind of an initial point. I think that's how I see this study as well. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being here and listening to this session. And please do not hesitate to contact me for further comments, questions. Here is my email address as well. You can anytime contact me. And here I can, now I can receive your question, comments as well. I would be willing to. Thank you very much.